What I remember growing up in Los Angeles during a time that when I started school, our neighborhoods were integrated. So we started elementary school with whites, blacks, Hispanics, Asians, um, whoever lived in the neighborhood. There was no busing back then in LA. So you went to whatever school was in your neighborhood. So our schools were interracially mixed. And I don't remember as a child experiencing that level of colorism. Um, but we did have the mindset. I don't know if it was conscious or subconscious, but we did have the mindset that the lighter skinned girls were prettier. Now, I didn't realize that I was even considered light skinned till I was in my 50s, because color was never an issue in my family or even in my neighborhood. So even though we knew it was just kind of a mindset that the lighter the skin, the prettier you were, it wasn't as overt as what is depicted in that movie.
So when you had the mindset, what do you think the mindset? I mean, I can speculate, but
Well,
where did the mindset come from?
the mindset came from primarily because most of the visuals we would see in media, television, magazines, billboards, or whatever, uh, if it showed a black person at all, if they were of a darker complexion, it showed them as being buffoonery
Mm.
or overly exaggerated features like the big red lips and the eyes that were bucked out, and it just didn't show them in a complimentary way. So most of what we had to look at to admire, so to speak, would either be white people or very light complexioned colored people, as we were called back then, colored.
Mhm.
So that's where the subconsciousness, I believe, emanated from. The images that we saw were primarily of lighter skinned people or white people.
So what? So with that, why do you think it continues to be an issue now? Because again, we are we've always been a diverse people, a diverse spectrum of colors in our race. Why do you think it continues to be a problem? Because you see this movie, and by the way, I didn't do my disclaimer. The videos snippets that I'm using, and also any references to any media is for fair use commentary, and I put the links for you to view in its entirety in the description. But why do you think it continues to permeate now? Because this movie was from 1988. And here as of late, and I guess, well, not as of late, it's really been a serious argument, or debate, if you will, about colorism within our race, within our people.
Now, what was the question again?
Why do you think it continues to be a problem now? Because we have more diverse images in the media, in movies, in magazines. Why do you think it continues to be such an issue even now?
Well, if you don't address, the history of behind that, history is going to always be doomed to repeat itself. There was a time in our history that some people that was considered an advantage at the time to be a lighter complexion, they got better opportunities. And in some cases, they would pass for white. Now, you know, the way we think today, that would be considered an absolute, negative character trait to pass for white. But if you know anything about our history in this country, uh, it can also be considered a way to save your life back then. Uh, because there's some things, as a people, we can't hide the fact by our complexions that we are black people. But if you were lighter skinned, you could kind of pass through society with not as much intimidation as those with apparently darker skin. So it starts back then, and it really starts even before then, how we even acquired the lighter complexions uh, in our African uh, lineage. So there's so many different avenues to incorporate into that thinking, that to just settle on one reason, it wouldn't cover it.
Now, Mama, you said that you didn't even know that you were considered light skinned until you were in your 50s. So, given that, do you think that you were treated differently because you thought that you were darker skinned, or did you notice a difference?
Well, it's so many different ladders to light skin, because some people, we had the high yellow, then we had the red,
The red bone, yeah.
and I guess I fall more into the red bone category. But in my immediate family, I was the lighter complexioned of my siblings. But that was never an issue in our family, because we had cousins who had the really light skin and the green eyes and such. But that was never an issue with us as a family. We never even focused on that. So for me to say that I didn't even know I was considered light skinned, it was only when I started traveling, excuse me, to some of the Caribbean countries, that the little children over there were calling me white. And I said, "What do you mean?" They thought I was white, because
Mm,
I guess there's a certain level of light skinnedness, that if you're over that level, that you're just considered white over there. And that's what they were calling me. So I started trying to examine that. But up until then, I never even considered color
mhm.
among black people to be a thing.
Well, and I'm gonna get Danielle on this, and also shout out to Ace Butterfly, because Ace Butterfly was the one that sent this suggestion to my email with respect to me being, I guess, lighter complexion, and um, raising Danielle, who is darker than me, if I ever saw any difference, or if she ever experienced any differences. So, Danielle, if are you listening?
Yeah, I'm here.
Do you have any experience, or do you feel that you experienced any challenges or difficulties or any questions about, you know, your skin color, as opposed to being as my skin color being that I was your mom? Did you ever notice anything? Did you ever experience anything?
Honestly, no. Because I didn't think you were that much lighter than me, I guess. I mean, you're lighter, but it's not like with me and my daughter. Like she's drastically lighter than me. I'm not that much darker than you, so I didn't notice it too much.
Mhm.
Only time my color ever was an issue for me growing up is when you moved me to the South for the first time. That's when I
That,
really noticed that I was black.
that
Because
you mean darker skin? You mean,
just
or
in general, like I wasn't black enough for the black people, but I was too black for the white people. Versus in California, the way I grew up, none of that really mattered. They just cared, like, oh, you're a nice person, oh, you like Barbies, okay, let's play. Versus when I moved to
Yeah.
Tennessee, it was like, oh, why do you talk like a white girl? Why don't you have no, slang about you? Why do you dress like that? And then the white people are like, oh, we don't hang out with your kind. So I
Mm,
literally was just ostracized when I was in like
Right.
elementary school, because the way I grew up in California, that was normal. But in Tennessee, it wasn't. So that's the only time I noticed anything with colorism was there,
Right.
because like basically me being looking as though I look white or act white, I
mm.
was more so bullied, if I had to say, by my own people than I was even with the white people. Like I said, they just didn't talk to me, but the black people would just like roast me and just like laugh at me in my face. Like,
I
so,
think,
yeah,
as I started out saying that I grew up in Los Angeles, of course, that was several decades before you were born. I'm talking about in the 50s and in the 60s. We just didn't give that type of thing. We had more important issues to deal with.
exactly.
We had civil rights, of course, in Los Angeles. We didn't have the overt discrimination as they did in the South, but there was discrimination, even though we didn't, as children, we didn't recognize it, but our parents did, because
Hmm.
our parents came from the South during the Great Migration. Me and my siblings and first cousins, we were first generation born in Los Angeles in our family. So the issues of color, like Danielle is saying, it just wasn't an issue that I really paid any attention to, as she said, until I moved further south.
You make a good point because shout out to What the Funk. He wrote here, School Days is a classic, and it used to be AKA was considered light skin, and deltas were considered dark skin, and that is true. I remember when I went to the University of Oklahoma, because I will say, I'm a lot darker skinned now than I was in my youth, and even when I was in college. And I remember them would come up telling me, you should be an AKA. I'm like, what does that mean? Because I was light skinned, and the darker skin uh ladies or young women were considered, well, you look like you should be a delta. So again, and that was in the 80s and into the 90s. And I have a picture here of my grandfather, and I put Joseph Jones's legacy, because you can see now. I showed my nephew, because you all have seen Spunk Adams on my video. So these are pictures of him and Danielle when they were little, and you can see the various shades of in our own family, the
Mm-hmm.
blue eyes. So
Mm-hmm.
again, it's something that we never really thought about. Actually, I never even thought about it much myself. But here's the thing my mother talked about, I think is very poignant. Right now, what is happening in these social media streets, and you talked about the caricatures of Black people that were seen, the big lips, the bulging eyes, et cetera, et cetera. What is happening now is that many people, I'll just say in general, men in general, particularly Black men, there are certain stereotypes that are now being associated with darker women. What am I talking about? They're saying that the darker women are more ratchet, more ghetto, more outspoken. So now all the negative connotations, even though we don't have the issue of not being represented in media and entertainment, but what we also have now are the stereotypes that are being associated with darker skinned women. What are your thoughts about that? Either one of you.
First of all, who are they?
In social media,
Okay, well then,
many content creators, even like I have a YouTube channel. There are a lot of people in these spaces that have YouTube channels, and again, they are commenting on. I'll just give you an example. There was a incident on one of the podcasts a couple of days ago where a Black woman got into a verbal argument with a man on the podcast. Both of them Black. The woman ended up getting to a physical altercation with the man, and she's darker skinned. So now many people are commenting on her behavior, and that's just one example. Now the behavior is the behavior, but people, particularly men, a lot of men are associating those kinds of behaviors with darker complexioned women.
Well, I mean, with that, I look at it from the different side of that, where because I didn't notice the colorism thing really for darker skinned women and men until I got into college. Because, my world, when you grow up, it's all about you and what you need to do. And there was never an issue of dating for me. There was never an issue of opportunities for me. There was never those kinds of issues because I was of a technically lighter skin tone. So when I came to college and I met darker skinned women and hearing their background, I was like, what? You dealt with that? Because it's something in my life it just never happened. Like I like hearing darker skinned women never dating, never having a boyfriend. I'm like, that's a thing. Meanwhile, I've had several. And it's not just one dark skinned woman. I've heard it from several different ones. So it's like I feel like the world, because of like even what Mama said, they paint darker skinned women in like not the most pretty light. I mean, there's movies, I'm sure, if you see a lighter skinned woman, she's in a more submissive, kind hearted, caring role. But you have the dark skinned woman playing in the media as the aggressor, the single mom who got to deal with all these kids and she dark and she aggressive, or, she in jail. It's like usually if it's those rough, very aggressive roles more often than not. Maybe not now, but before that, you saw played by darker skinned women. So there's been this media portrayal of dark skinned women not being the chosen mate, being the backbone of the family and not in the good way.
Well, and
Versus,
before mommy, before you answer, to that point, you're absolutely right, because there have been in lately in not only social media but in mainstream media, there have been black men who have said they don't, and mind you, they dark. I don't want to date a dark skinned woman.
well, yeah, they want light skinned babies. I mean, and it's not all their fault. It's just what's portrayed. I mean, look at my husband. Kevon is clearly a lot darker than me, but
No, it's not their fault. It's the conditioning that we have had to deal with for generations back.
yeah.
I was just reading a scripture this morning out of Proverbs. It says not to choose any of the oppressor's ways. But that's exactly what we did as a people. And the fact of the matter is, our oppressors were white, and they chose to follow the ways of the oppressor. So white looked more attractive.
Mm,
There was a time that, our black men, my father included, he chose lighter skinned women. That's just the facts. And he was a very dark skinned man. And at one time, we just used the excuse, opposites attract. But as far as the black female is concerned, we run the spectrum of skin tones.
mm-hmm,
So if you what you're looking for is a lighter complexion, we got that. But it got to a point where that wasn't even enough.
mm-hmm.
You went all the way over to white, but that was being envious of the oppressor and choosing their ways because their ways look more attractive.
Yeah, very true. And doesn't help. Again, it's no shade to them in the intention, but if you're a man, right, and you grow up, I'm not saying obviously LeBron James has a black wife, but like let's just say as an example, you grow up and LeBron James' wife is white, and all the people you emulate, their wives are white.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to naturally think, oh yeah, I'm gonna pick a black woman, because you
Mm-hmm.
associate success being a black man by marrying a white woman.
And
That's
beauty. Don't forget beauty.
Exactly. So it's like but versus the media and the things you see in social media, all the people who are with black women, yeah, are y'all even successful? Or if it is a black man with a black woman, she's of lighter skin. So it's always, you don't see very dark skinned people together associated with success. Someone's always lighter in the relationship. Like it's very rare that I see two dark skinned people together. Like
Not that it's not happening, but the images
exactly.
is what's so brainwashing. It's the images that we have before us, and that goes way back. Like I started out saying when I first came on, that for a long time, that's all the images that we saw. We saw a black image. It was someone like Lena Horne, or Josephine Baker, or any of the
Yep.
women in that category that they could have passed for white if they chose to.
Yeah, that's what Ace Butterfly, he said, I see many of old black Hollywood as biracial looking versus darker skinned lead actors, e.g. Dorothy Dandridge, Lena Horne, kind of like what you were just saying.
Mm-hmm. Well, I can't see all that at the same time. Let's see.
Okay. Real quick, Ace Butterfly is also asking for you, Mom. Did the color of skin impact the type of jobs people had, do you think?
Sure. It did. Most of your darkest, you saw your janitors, uh, and porters at the train stations and airports. They were all the subservient, so to speak, jobs. You mostly saw those being filled by darker skinned people, and your maids, your domestic workers, cafeteria workers, things of that sort. They were mostly filled by darker skinned women. But of course, at the time, in real time, for me, I didn't even pay that any attention because of uh, the region that I grew up in. That just wasn't a thing. That wasn't a factor. It was, if you could just get a job, you get a job. We had no, we just didn't have that mindset that you could get this kind of job because you were this color or that color. Even though it was happening throughout the country, it just wasn't a real focus where we grew up. We knew that there was discrimination, but we weren't just openly aware of it like it was happening in the South.
Exactly. Yeah, the South really is where colorism for me went full fledged. Like, had I stayed in California my entire upbringing, it's not that I didn't know I was black, because obviously I did, but it wasn't a constant reminder like it
Mm-hmm.
is in the South. Like in the South, you reminded every time you get looked at crazy that you black. You get reminded every time somebody cuts you off that you black. In
Mm-hmm.
California, you
No.
just don't get that. It's just not there. Like it's more of a rare occurrence versus
Well, in
South. It's every
California,
day.
yeah, true, baby. And in California, we weren't made to feel ashamed that we were black.
Yeah, very true.
You know, that's the reason why I've been in the South. Well, I'm in the deep South now. And I had an experience just this past week. I went to a mattress store to purchase a new bed, and my salesperson was a white man, my age, as a matter of fact. As we had a little conversation, we are the same age. And just during the course of this sales transaction, all of a sudden, out of the blue, he asked me where was I from, because it's the way I interacted with him um, is probably different than what he's accustomed to, the way he's accustomed to interacting with black people that are from the South, and they know immediately that you're from somewhere else, because that's how we grew up. We grew up with a sense of pride. And I'm not saying that black people in the South don't have that, because they have it on another level, because they suffered through things that we didn't have to suffer through. So I applaud them to the utmost, because they bore the brunt of the civil rights movement. So I'm not trying to negate that in any way, but it's just an aura about what conditions you grew up under. And we didn't have to suffer a lot of what they suffered. We had it in a more subtle way
Very.
that we didn't even identify as discrimination at the time, but I do now.
When you say you do now, what gives an example of how you look back on it and know now?
Well, what I look back on is because I just recently re-entered college, and some of the studies that I've had to take have highlighted what I didn't recognize in real time as what it was. For one, redlining. I don't know who all might be familiar with the term redlining, but what it is a discriminatory practice in real estate, banking, and so forth, insurance, and those industries. I remember, I'm gonna give a real live example. I said earlier that when I started school, our neighborhoods were integrated and our schools were integrated. That's from elementary school all the way through, I'm going to say, because we called it junior high, they call it middle school now. But by the time we got to high school, there was the population in our schools was predominantly Black and Hispanic. We didn't see any more whites. We didn't see any more Asians. It was primarily Black and Hispanic. Well, I didn't know at the time what that was about. But in my studies, I learned that it was a practice, an illegal practice, but you can find ways around the law uh, to keep certain groups, ethnic groups, confined to one area of the city. They wouldn't sell you houses in certain areas. They wouldn't give you bank loans or mortgage loans if you lived in a certain area. That was to keep you confined. That's why we come up with communities like Watts and Compton and what they now call South Central. They weren't calling it that when I was growing up. But anywhere where there's a big congregation of people of color, uh, that's how that came about, to keep them confined. So when I say it was more subtle, that's one way, but there were other ways as well. We dealt with police brutality. Of course, our minds were so indoctrinated that we as a people were troublemakers. That was a brainwashing. So whenever you saw Black people getting involved with police, our minds automatically told us, because of the brainwashing, that they had done something wrong.
From the viewpoint of being in California, watching what was going on in the South, is that what you're talking about?
No, I'm talking about watching what was going on, for instance, in the Watts riot,
Okay, gotcha. Okay.
because I was a teenager at that time. But we just that's one of the subtleties versus what was going on in the South. We could go anywhere we wanted to go to eat. We could go anywhere we wanted to shop. I didn't know that we couldn't buy a house anywhere at the time. But you know, the I'm trying to compare the difference in discrimination in California than in the South.
Okay.
They couldn't go to a lunch counter. They had to sit in lunch counters. They couldn't drink out the same water fountain. Oh, they couldn't use the same restrooms. They couldn't check in to certain hotels. We didn't go through that sort of thing, but we had discrimination just the same. It was just more subtle.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
How our like I said, how our schools ended up being primarily Hispanic and Black
Mm-hmm.
through a discriminatory practice called redlining. But
Mm-hmm.
we didn't know that was happening. I'm not even sure if our parents knew that's what was happening.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I learned about that in school too. And I mean, it's still a thing. It's not an official thing where they're like you are denying you a mortgage per se. But like Mama said, they got little ways
Mm-hmm.
around it. Like, because even where I live, it wouldn't surprise me if we applied for this mortgage that it would have been all of a sudden not possible. Or even just the most recent thing that's another racism towards Black people that's subtle is
Yeah.
appraisal when you're
It
trying
was
to
your name.
sell.
If your name was Shaniqua Jordan
Okay, I would
or
immediately get looked
Jamal
over.
Jordan.
Get looked over for jobs. I mean, Mom, you said that. That's the reason why you named me my name, because you
Yeah.
didn't want me to deal with the assumption of me being of lesser class, of being ghetto based on my name solely. I mean, even, my husband deals with that because
And
his name
and, and,
is so
and let's
evident.
deal with that term ghetto because I find that term very offensive.
And it is. And that's what they associate things that have. I'm like, that doesn't make
What
any
what what's
sense. Like,
wrong with what's wrong with being ghetto?
why does that seem like you're of
What,
lesser value because you.
wait a minute, Danielle. What'd you say, mommy?
I said, what's wrong with being ghetto? When you've set up a system that creates ghettos.
Exactly.
So now you set the system up for us to, like I was saying about Watts, Compton, they're considered the ghetto. You set the system up, and then we're we don't understand the dynamics behind that, so we even use the term against ourselves that we're ghetto. I say again, what's wrong with being ghetto? Because for all intents and purposes, I was born and raised in the ghetto. But ghetto is a state of mind. It's not a location. Hello.
All right. Okay, let me read it. Okay, Ace Butterfly is asking, wow, Miss Shirley, who and where did the indoctrinating come from? I think you answered that though. The indoctrinating of I guess I'm assuming that they're asking being black as being, a troublemaker, but I think you kind of alluded to that.
Well,
Um,
look, can I give you an example?
yeah, mom,
Let's
go
let's
ahead.
let's talk about the Black Panthers up in Oakland, Northern California. Let's talk about Malcolm X on the East Coast. Let's talk about, I just watched this documentary the other night about Josephine Baker. Once she got involved in the civil rights movement. Anytime any of us got involved in anything that's promoting equal rights, we were termed troublemakers or communists, because back then communist meant you was an automatic enemy of this country. And you had what's his name, Hoover, the head of the FBI at the time.
J. Edgar Hoover, yeah.
If he put if he stamped you with that, uh, and then of course we didn't have the social media like we have now. We just had television, three basic stations, and you got your news from those stations. You got your propaganda from those stations. That's what we had. So it was easy to get indoctrinated to that. Every time you would see someone black being named as a communist, that was automatic red flag. Oh, they're troublemakers. So that was a mindset. We were indoctrinated.
Hmm.
Now the Black
So
Panthers, they wanted to make it seem like anytime they call them militants, anytime any group of blacks or even individuals for that matter spoke up in defense of black people and their civil rights, they turned Martin Luther King a communist, because they were going against the system the way that they wanted this system to be and the way the system really is. There's just been some movements that ended up with some laws being passed, but laws don't change hearts.
grow them, mommy. Grow them.
Well, that's just the truth. And y'all, I gotta go.
Okay, one more thing real quick before you go, mommy. Um, do you think, since we're talking about colorism, do you think what you've seen now over the past 30, 40 years, that there is such a thing as light skin privilege?
Uh, I think it's more so among us than it is.
And that's what I'm talking about. That's what
Yeah,
I'm talking about.
yeah, among us because of ignorance. And I'm not trying to sound like I'm so up on it because I just started learning some things that I wasn't aware of with just within the last 4 years myself. Um, but I just attribute it to our own ignorance of our own history. We need to learn more about our own history, and then we would be more understanding. And we, as a people, wouldn't stand for all this stuff that we have been that we have bought into
Against
against
ourselves.
ourselves.